Okay. All righty. Looks like we are good. Good afternoon to everyone. Happy Friday to you. I hope that you are enjoying this Good Friday afternoon. We are thankful for you joining in with us today as we conclude our walk through the giving of the Ten Commandments, the 10 words, the Decalogue of Exodus chapter 20 and verses 1 through 17. We're actually going to get through the end of verse 21 today, and then we will get into the rest of the text beginning on Tuesday. I'm glad that we originally planned on just kind of running through this text, but I'm glad that we took some time to slow down to go through this text of the Ten Commandments, because maybe there's a lot more here than meets the eye. Oftentimes we kind of just run over these commands and we see them as very cut and dry. They say what they say and they mean what they mean, and we don't really give much consideration to context or maybe even some possible issues that people might find in the biblical text that they might raise concerning these commands. I'm glad to slow down with Alan and go through these with you. Hope that you benefited from our study in the first four, over the first four commands on Tuesday, as we looked at the section pertaining to each Israelites and Jews' relationship with God. And now we're going to look at the relationship between a Hebrew man or woman and his or her neighbor. That was really the bedrock for the way that society would carry itself at this time. We're looking forward to getting into that. And just remind you that Jesus, whenever he was asked in the Gospels, what is the greatest command? Well, he could have gone here and they could have said, okay, is it 1 through 10, or again 1 through 13, depending on how you look at it. If you look at it from a Jewish perspective, he could have picked just a number, but instead he sums up these commands as he says, well, the greatest command, of course, is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But second is to love your neighbor as yourself. We're going to look at the loving your neighbor as yourself portion of that summation today as we go through Exodus chapter 20 and verses 12 and then finish in verse 21. Thank you for joining us today. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the comment box on the Facebook page, or if we're watching on YouTube, you can leave it in the comment box on YouTube as well. We have those pulled up here so that we could see those and address those when we have the opportunity to do such. Joining me as always is my good friend Alan Sienenstrang. We're thankful for him and his preparation in these studies. Alan, brother, it is good to see you, man. I hope that you and your family have enjoyed a great week this week.
Oh yeah, like we were just talking about just how nice it's been. We've been able to get out and go walking at the park and just be outside a little bit more this week. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to fall kind of merging in here a little bit pretty soon, so we can do that even more.
Tell you, fall arriving would bother me none at all. I would gladly welcome it at this point. Well, one of the reasons I normally look forward to fall is because that means football. But of course, that's up in the air just about like everything else in the world at this point. But nonetheless, we are thankful for God's tremendous blessings, because even in difficult circumstances as we are facing right now, God's blessings are abundant. And they are not just abundant, but I am convinced they are evident. And we would do well to recognize those blessings and to take time very often to give God uh, thanks and to show him our gratitude for the blessings that he has given to us. One such blessing that we, of course, do not want to take for granted and greatly enjoy is the blessing of being able to study in this way here and in this social media and online format. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop that in the comment section. And without further ado, we want to get into the text. I actually want to read, just for the sake of reading scripture and it being a good thing, I want us to read the entire Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, as we have here in Exodus chapter 20. I want to begin in verse 1 and go through verse 17 with you all once again. Just a reminder again that we have already covered the first four commandments, and we're going to begin in verse number 12 this afternoon, where it shifts focus just a little bit. But in Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. The text tells us that God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me, and do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship to them, and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children of the father's iniquity, or for the father's iniquity, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you or your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Verse number 12, honor your father and your mother, so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, again, if you're joining us for the first time maybe today and you're interested in those first 4 commands that end at verse 11, then I invite you to go back in the videos that we have on our Facebook page, the Pleasant Plains Church of Christ Facebook page, or that we have on YouTube and the Walking Through History page. We have those chronicled there. I actually think I have one that I need to upload that did not live stream, but we have our previous studies there. And we have the previous study from where we looked at those first 4 commandments. So if you're curious about those, I invite you to go and to check those out. But we are beginning in verse number 12 today, which is the 5th command, to honor your father and your mother, so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. We might see that as kind of a random transition, going from speaking about God for four commands, and then now speaking about people and your father and your mother and giving honor to them. I would suggest to you that if there ever was a great transition from a focus on our responsibility towards God to our responsibility towards our fellow man, I think it begins here with the father and mother and giving them the proper honor and respect, Alan, because really, I believe that is the foundation of a society. It begins in the home, and it begins with a proper respect towards your parents. And that is a foundation that can go on through the rest of our lives. Alan, what do you see as being important here in verse number 12 in this 5th command of honoring your father and your mother? Is that, let me phrase this for you, is that just black and white, straight, no issue, no considerations, nothing at all? What do you say about this text, Alan?
What we'll see with all of these, we've seen it with the first 4, but it's even more obvious, I think, with these last ones because they're just so short. So you would think that means they're more simple, do not murder, do not steal.
I wish.
But but we'll see that none of those words is entirely clear. Like murder is obviously a term that can mean lots of different things, there's different nuances of meaning there. So what's interesting, what I think is amazing about all these is you can't, if we just read the 10 commandments, if we just read, honor your father and mother, and didn't have the rest of the law, the rest of scriptures and their commentary and their examples, we would have no idea how to accurately follow these, I think. Just because they are such principles, like we talked about, they're such great principle laws, not necessarily, exact, cut and dry laws, like a speed limit nowadays. That's pretty simple. You don't, if you're going 60 miles an hour or above, you're speeding. If you're under that, you're not. I mean, there's an easy line to draw. But these are, so all of these are not so cut and dry. This one specifically is a little bit different. Ephesians talks about this one, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
is that promise? So that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You mentioned this is foundational to a good, happy, moral, positive, thriving society is a proper respect and honor for your father and mother, for those that are older. I think we can expand that beyond just our physical mother and father, but just age and wisdom in general, uh, just based on other scriptures. So, what is the promise? Well, you'll have a long life. Things will be good for you, and I mean that's what everyone really wants. They want a long life in the land that the Lord is giving us, and I think it doesn't say it there, but I think that also implies a happy and prosperous life as well. I mean, it wouldn't be very good to say a long and terrible life. I think there's more than just length of days here, but that is something that comes from uh, properly honoring your father and mother and having this foundational family structure that is based on God, based on his what he wants of one father, one mother, you know as the core family unit, we might say. That's important for a thriving society.
Absolutely. And as you talked about, as much as we might wish that these commands, these words came very cut and dry, and there isn't really much thinking that goes into them, we have to remember, again, and I mentioned this last time, that we have to read these things through the eyes of we have to read these commands through the eyes of those who they were originally given to, because culture has changed and the understanding in certain situations has changed. If we come into these commands and read them with straight up 21st century Western eyes, we might not understand the nuance that is involved here. And just looking at particularly this command, the fifth command, critically, meaning trying to dive in and understand it to its fullest extent, we might have some questions. Well, here's the first one: there is no age limit. So what does that mean in regards to the honoring of the father and the mother? Some might say, well, the easiest way to define honoring father or mother is just to obey them, just to do what they say, and they tell you to do it, then you do it. Well, then that just brings into issues. Well, does that mean even if I am grown and out of their home, do I still need to obey them? Does that mean I need to obey them to their last breath? That's the kind of questions that might come into this. So we need to really define, what does it truly mean to honor your father and mother? Is that strict obedience? I think that's part of it. If you go to a place like Deuteronomy 21 and you read about the man that's described there, one of the case studies of this law being applied here, who does not obey the voice of his father and his mother, is taken before the elders of the city and ends up being killed for his disobedience and dishonoring of his father and mother. Is it just the fact that he did not obey what his father and mother said? Well, what happens if your father and mother are well advanced in age and their minds simply are not there anymore? What if they tell you to do something that would lead to great bodily harm for them? If your mother or father is, just throw a very high number up there, we'll just do something absolutely ridiculous. Say your dad is 110 and his mind is not there anymore, his body is not there anymore, and he says, I need the keys to your car. Give me the keys to your car. Are we to do that? That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. Is this a black and white, straight up command to obey? Again, part of it, but there's another part of that. So I think, and it goes more towards the honoring portion of this text. I think it's more not straight up just obey, but it's don't embarrass, don't humiliate, don't disregard your parents. Yes, obedience is involved in that, but it's not obedience without context. What if the command from your parents is to do something that is evil in the sight of the Lord? Are you to obey that? So we understand then that whenever we come to a text such as this, we have to look at it with an eye of understanding the context of when these commands are given and the context in which these commands might need to be exercised or obeyed, or I don't want to say disobey, because that's not the right word for it. Or it might be an instance where these commands just don't apply. To honor your father and mother does not simply mean you do every single thing they say all the time, no matter the context, because that in fact could lead to a dishonoring in fact, of your mother, father. But Alan, I think you make great points that it's so important for us to look at these contextually and not just take them black and white, because that could get us into trouble. Now, granted, I will say that doing things in a black and white way, that makes it a lot easier. We don't have to think really in that way, but to look at these things with a critical eye and to evaluate context, it really does make things a little more difficult. But I think we're able to get to the heart of what these commands are trying to tell us when we put in that little extra work to dig in and really understand the meaning behind what the Lord gives in these instances.
That's why I like that you mentioned that case study in Deuteronomy. I think of the example when Jesus kind of mentions this in the New Testament. You know how the Pharisees, they were breaking this. They thought they were breaking this command because they were doing something else more important. They were, the money that, whatever they'd saved up that should have been going to maybe helping an aged father or mother, taking care of them. They said, well, I'm going to give this to the poor. I'm going to give this to the temple or whatever. And, that sounds good. They're giving money, that's a good place to give money. But by doing that, they were dishonoring their mother and father because they should have been taking care of them. So it's good to look at these types of like case studies or examples, and how in that instance, honor your father and mother has nothing to do with obeying, but just caring for in later years. More than worrying about, how you look by giving a bunch of money at the temple. Another thing that makes this law, I think, unique in that culture is the inclusion of the mother in this.
That's good, yeah.
I mean, the father and your mother. I mean, yes, father is mentioned first, but I mean, the idea is both of them are to receive honor. And that was, again, these are revolutionary laws, because what status did women have in that society? Even your, the wife, the first wife, like a Sarah to Abraham or a Rebecca to Isaac, they did not have the same status or the same level that we see with men and women today. So we'll see, not just in the Ten Commandments, but in several of these laws having to do with parents and specifically women, just the acknowledgement that women are, it acknowledges that the difference in status. Men obviously have a higher status than women in that day and age. So the Bible doesn't say anything like, oh, that shouldn't be, but it makes sure to elevate the women's importance and make sure that there are laws that take care of them. Make sure that because if they didn't, then they would have died back then. They wouldn't have had the safety nets that we have today. So I mean, this was a matter of life and death. So if you honor your father, that's an easy one, but honor your mother too, especially if she becomes a widow, and loses her household or loses her income or something, then that was very, very important to the livelihood of these women. But it just shows that this was a very progressive, revolutionary law that the Lord is caring for all of his people, both men and women, equally.
Right, and what you're talking about there with the taking care of women at that time is actually something that's going to play into the seventh commandment about adultery, but we'll get there in a moment. But also just thinking about this whole code that is given by God to the children of Israel. You talk about the word revolutionary and progressive. That's exactly what it was. There is nothing we have in history, as far as we can tell, maybe apart from the Code of Hammurabi, that is as extensive as we have here. And even though there are a few similarities between that code and what the Lord has given here, this one blows that one out of the water in so many different regards. And people want to say, well, what we have in the Ten Commandments and the law of Moses, it just takes and borrows from other such laws and codes and puts it together into this one. And that just simply is not true. This text that we have here stands far and away above any other ancient text that is out there and that is available to us today. And so if somebody tries to tell you that what we have in the text is just borrowing and stealing from other cultures and ancient writings, that just simply that's that's silliness. And to put it in a very kind way, that just is not accurate whatsoever. Moving on then, Alan, to the next command, the sixth command. It says in the CSB and most modern translations, do not murder. But here's the problem. You would think, oh, hey, that's I mean, that's simple. But the complication, we might say, the issue arises when you look to other texts. The King James, I believe, for one, simply says, do not kill. Now, to me, the words murder and kill, those do not mean precisely the same thing. While there might be some overlap there, obviously, any murder is killing. The question that becomes, is all killing murder? And I would say no. Alan, why don't you give us some insight in there, and I'll add on anything that might be left at the end.
Oh yeah, this is another one where it definitely helps having 66 books of the Bible to look at examples and see how this comes into play. So I think what we're talking about here with murder is just unlawful killing. It's probably the best description of that word that I can think of. So that also implies that there is lawful killing, maybe by the authorities, killing a murderer, as a means of punishment, or anyone else that breaks the law in a capital offense way. So, and clearly, I mean, God doesn't. He allows for the killing of some people, whether
Once
that
he just
be
allows, he actually commands,
yeah,
the killing of some people. Which
so
that's where people have this issue. How could God say, again, the claim is, how can he say not kill, but then he himself orders killing? That would be what's what I'm looking for? A problem here, an inconsistency, I should say, in the text.
I love thinking about this, and then the story of the whole episode of David and Bathsheba. There's a lot of this happening both in his actions and even in the parable that the prophet Nathan gives to him.
For this command and the next one, in fact.
Yeah, but I mean for several of them in that story. But I kind of find it interesting too that what does David say after he hears the story of the rich man that takes the poor man's one little lamb and kills it to feed his family? Like, what does David say? He says that man should be killed.
Yep.
So I mean, I don't know if that means to include, you could even include animals in this in some form or fashion, but at the very least, it's definitely unlawful taking of life, unauthorized. So who can authorize the taking of life? Obviously, the giver of life can, God. So if he says, go off and kill all the Amalekites, man, woman, and child, then you can go kill all the Amalekites, man, woman, and child, and you will not be breaking the law of God because he commanded it. So it's pretty simple. So yeah, it's more than just the word kill. I think that's a bad term just to define it. Murder helps, but even murder implies, I think, we have degrees of murder ourselves just in our court system. So obviously, I think this is more of the first degree murder, premeditated, evil, and that just shows that all of these, there's an aspect where we have to know the intent of the heart too. Why was that life being taken? To what purpose? To what what were they doing? So those are the questions you have to ask to determine if this was violated or not. And then of course, then here comes Jesus, and we're trying to figure out who can murder or not, and Jesus makes us even more strict, I guess you would say, in the Sermon on the Mount. Verse 21 of chapter 5, you have heard that it is said to our ancestors, do not murder. Whosoever murders will be subject to judgment. I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults, whoever says you fool. So Jesus, again, we're looking at these as principles This is not just a, do not murder. If you haven't murdered, then you are not guilty. Well, you can be guilty of this violating this commandment even without murdering, according to the according to the person that the being that gave these commandments, Christ. So, again, these principles, the idea is I think diminishing the value of something that God has given immense value to, diminishing the value of a life, and especially a life that is in the image of God. I think that's key there. So even if we haven't taken that life yet, but by being angry, by just with our words and our actions, our thoughts, our the things that we do and say, we are lowering the value of that life that Christ died for, that the Lord made in His image. Then that is murder in a sense, and I think in actuality. So even without the exact action of taking the life, we've diminished that value. So to me, like, what Jesus is trying to say here is, okay, obviously don't murder, but value lives so much that you don't even come close to thinking about murder. Put so much value, put the Lord's value in others' lives, whether that be your enemies, loving your enemies, that He'll talk about later, whether that be the most the life that is on the lowest rung of society, a woman, a slave, a infant child, a baby in someone's womb. Those are lives that are valued by God and should be protected and should be loved, and we should not even with our language diminish that life in any way.
Right. I think you said something really poignant in all that, Alan, talking about the fact that God commanded killing is very, I think, very important to this discussion, because we are image bearers of God and other people are image bearers of God. Therefore, the only one who has the right to command really the either life or death of image bearers is the one whose image they're bearing, and that's God. God is the one who created life, and therefore He has the right to take life. He has the right to command life to be taken. Whenever we do that unlawfully, without His permission or without His command, then we are in a sense trying to usurp His position as the image giver. And that, of course, is not appropriate at all. Just a little bit of nerdy stuff here, Alan. The word here, ratzak, the Hebrew word ratzak, it means to murder, to slay, to kill. Yet this term is never used in any context where the Lord commands killing or where the Lord Himself does killing. Think of the angel of the Lord as he went through and killed the firstborn within Egypt. The term there uses not the word ratzak. It's a different term meant to take life. So this term here, the prohibition given here to murder, does not apply to God whatsoever, and is never commanded to be committed whatsoever within Scripture. Therefore, the only proper understanding here is that this is certainly a prohibition against the unlawful taking of life. If we go anywhere else with that, then we're going to run into a number of issues, like people who would just want to say this is any killing. Well, like you mentioned about animals, that way we can't eat animals. Do we all have to run around and be vegans? Well, that can't be the case either, because what does God do? God commands the killing of animals for sacrificial purposes. This term cannot apply to anything else other than murder. But I do appreciate so much you talk about, well, what can help us to get from even getting to this point? It's the proper love that we ought to have for our fellow man. Again, tying in Jesus' summation of this text. You ought to love your neighbor as yourself. The love that you would desire for other people to give to you, you ought to give that to others first. And I like Sandra here talking about, part of the place in this is abuse as well. Physical abuse towards a fellow man, or especially child abuse. That is so inappropriate. Again, that's a fellow image bearer. you would not want somebody to abuse you, and just very simply following Jesus, because you would not want somebody to abuse you, you should not abuse other people. Sandra, thank you for your comment. Abe, thank you for your kind words as well. Alan, well said there. If we want to get into the weeds a little more, Alan, let's talk about that. Number 7 now. Do not commit adultery. In the Old Testament, there are 2 things that are referred to as the great sin, and especially in ancient literature as well: adultery and idolatry. Alan, what do you want to share with us about this text before? I don't know if you're going to get in the weeds like I am with this one, but you can keep us in the shallow end before I take us into the deep end here in a second.
I mean, I'll stick with what Jesus says in Matthew again. I mean, right in the next verses after we just looked at.
I think that's always a good. That's always a good plan.
and again, Jesus takes these and. I think even the strictest of Pharisees would probably not be as strict as what Jesus says about some of these commands. You've heard what it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So again, you have the same kind of thing with murder. It's the violation of the command is not in the action itself. It comes well before that in the thought and in your heart, your mindset, your words, things that all this happens before any actual physical action, either killing or the physical act of having sex with someone outside of your marriage. All of these are violated, I think, even before that, according to Christ. So I think it's very for us to say, hey, I've never actually committed adultery, or I've never actually murdered, so I haven't violated these commands. I think it's pretty. I'd probably say wrong of us to express it that way. It's pretty bold of us to come up to the line, but just because we haven't done the action, assume that we're okay. Just what I'm reading Jesus saying here in regarding these, if it was one, you might think, oh, I must misinterpret it, but now he's had 2 of these commands that begin with what happens in your heart, and you're in violation at that point before you commit the act. So again, the point is to not even get close to committing the act, because if we can guard our hearts from these thoughts that can lead us down that path, then we never even get close to these heinous crimes here. But that's my 2 cents for this one.
The question is, how does the Old Testament define adultery? How would we define adultery? For us, I think we would define adultery as say if you were to say Nick committed adultery, then that would have meant that I would have had sexual relations with a woman not my wife, anybody not my wife. The Old Testament does not seem to define it in that sense. It seems to be, Old Testament speaking, that adultery was reserved for having sexual relations with someone else's wife, not an unmarried person, but specifically someone else's wife. Some evidence for that. Let's think about something that was found within the Old Testament. Polygamy. How polygamy, by definition, if we use our definition, would have to be adultery, because that would be you taking someone who's not your wife and having them for yourself as your wife, even though you've already had a wife. So how do we understand that then here within the context of this particular text? Well, the only way you can make it make sense, and especially if you consider the fact that as God comes into the picture and begins interacting with the patriarchs, they themselves are polygamists. Whenever Sarah tells Abraham to take Tamar as your wife, why does Abraham not be like, oh no, we can't, I can't do that. That's a great sin against God. Why does he not do that? Well, because it seems to be that was the cultural norm at that time. Not to say that that's God's ideal and what God wanted, Again, we could go back to Genesis 1 and see what God wanted. And we can see even Jesus himself tying that into Genesis 1 and saying, this is what God wants, and this is what expected of you. But as God interjects himself into human history and begins working with this particular family, we see polygamy as being something that is, again, I don't want to use the word accepted. Maybe tolerated is the better word during that time. Thinking about David and Bathsheba, what is David rebuked for in that text? Well, he took another man's wife. This man who had no issue seemingly with being a polygamist, with having a number of wives, he is rebuked strongly for taking another man's wife, not somebody who who was unmarried, but who was already married. That was an issue there. Throw in as well the practice of levirate marriage. Whenever we look at that issue within the Old Testament, of course, that being, if you're not familiar, the whole idea of there's a brother who has a wife, the brother dies. It is the responsibility of the next brother in that family to take that wife for himself and to produce children in order to carry out his name. But within any of those commands, there's never a mention of unless he is already married. So we take all of this together and we have to say, well, what is adultery in the Old Testament? Adultery seems to be more narrow than the way we define it. It really goes back to, you don't take something that belongs to someone else, which would play into the next command of do not steal. And I invite you to please do some reading and looking into that, just to do some study for yourself. I think that's fascinating, because I've never thought about adultery in that manner. But again, I'm a 21st century Westerner, and I have what my understanding of adultery is, which I believe is a proper understanding of it, but that's not their understanding of it. Which, again, if you're just reading this, you start asking questions about polygamy. You start asking questions about levirate marriages. How do we reconcile those things together to allow them to make sense? That's what I'll encourage people to do in any of these commands. Whenever people question you, whenever they introduce perceived inconsistencies to you, the best thing to do is do some digging. Look into cultural understandings, look into different things like that, so you can try to reconcile that within your own mind to try to come to a proper understanding. Again, that's the weeds of all this, just for you to maybe do some more digging in that. What you got, Alan?
My thing I always remember with this is it's important to consider the existence of a covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no covenant, like a covenant of marriage, then it's just a man and a woman and they sleep together. Neither of them are married. That would not be committing adultery. That's right. Something else.
That would be what we would term fornication.
Yeah. So there has to be on some level somewhere a covenant that is being broken or gone outside of,
which is the tie-in of adultery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which tie-in of idolatry, the wrong word, idolatry. There's a covenant between God and his people. Whenever they go after other gods, what is that? That's the breaking of the covenant that they have with Yahweh to pursue other gods.
Sure. And yeah, that's why he talks about that every time that the Israelites go worship somewhere else. He says, you're a bunch of adulterers, because they've made a covenant with him. We read about that in the previous chapter, the covenant. We promise, we vow to do all these that you have told us. Okay, there's the covenant. If you don't, you've broken that covenant. They've committed adultery in that point. So that's the key with understanding that phrase, apart from the polygamy and all the other weedy subjects there.
plenty of weeds for us to dig through. We got a garden of weeds out there that we can go dig into whenever we want to. Number 8, Alan, maybe the most cut and dry one of all of these. Do not steal. What do you have here in with this commandment?
That one's nice because it doesn't specify steal what. It just steal. So what is stealing? You're taking something that doesn't belong to you. So that can include a person, that can include an animal, that can include an object, that can include land, whatever it is. Do not steal it. So, like you said, it's a little more. This one's probably the most cut and dry of the final 6.
Right, and it's it's important to note even the context here, because think about it. Think about things that we could still today, that the Israelite, the Jew of this time, would never even comprehend being able to steal, like intellectual rights, patents, copyrights, anything like that. They would have no clue what any of that meant. So there is still an intuitive component to this. What can be stolen during your time? Well, the simple thing is, during their time, it was, like you said, kidnapping was part of it, animals was part of it, land was part of it, any other type of materials would be part of it. Some of those are still available today, but then there's so many more facets of life that could be stolen today. The title to your house could be stolen. I know that's something that apparently is a big deal right now. Listen to particular podcasts where that's one of the commercials. Hey, did you know somebody could go online and steal the title to your house and it's no longer yours? Well, who would ever think of that type of thing? But it's all encompassing. You do not steal. If it is not yours, you do not take it. It is not your right to have if it does not belong to you. That one was nice. That one didn't take too long. Unless you have anything else to add, Alan.
No, that was the easy one.
All right. Let's get back into the weeds then. And with the number 9, do not give false testimony against your neighbor. I think, Alan, this is one of the other ones where context is key. What do you have here for this 9th commandment?
Yeah, this one's really important. We might just chalk this up as like a don't lie, and that's it. But
it's the easy way to take this.
That's the easy way. But obviously, in the context, of course, it says false testimony against your neighbor. Think about the time frame and especially how courts and court cases would have occurred. They don't have a lot of physical evidence to go off of. So many times when someone is accusing someone of something or being accused of something, all they have to go by is eyewitnesses. And that was given a lot more weight than we do today. We tend to almost completely disregard eyewitness testimony. And we disregard video testimony sometimes, but back then that eyewitness testimony is all they had. So that's why there's importance given to truthfully testifying in court, and even having more than one witness. On the backs of 2 or 3 witnesses is a man condemned. Mm-hmm. It's interesting in Deuteronomy when it mentions that. The next verse, it talks about if this is a capital offense, so something that you can be killed for, whether it be murder or adultery or whatever. It's actually the witnesses that have to cast the first stone.
Right.
They are the ones actually involved in the execution, just as hopefully as a deterrent from false testimony. It's one thing to
Alan, what was the result if they did give false testimony and that was found out to be the case?
Because then they were the first ones to execute. So now they would be guilty of that lifeblood, which would put them online for murder. So
they would be punished in whatever way they had lied or given false testimony. They would be punished in the same way. Lex talionis, the eye for an eye, would be employed in that moment in this particular legal system context.
So a pretty good deterrent against false testimony. Obviously that would occur. For me, I think this one is even more important nowadays, more than, like I said, we think of this as just don't lie. But I mean, what does that mean to, give a false testimony about your neighbor? I mean, I think that can be telling stories or even exchanging false information about someone. And think about how much of that goes on just with the internet nowadays. I mean, It's so easy for us to even just, share a link to a news site or to a meme or something. And, we don't really think too much of it, but what if that link is false? What if that statement, whatever we share, what if that is a false testimony? Well, we've just added to the continuation of that false statement. And I mean, you know, we think, oh, that's not a big deal because we weren't doing it maliciously. We were just shared a link. It was so easy. I, I mean, I think we would be just as guilty as the first person who made that story up if we just share it around and add to it. I mean, how many times does the Bible talk about slander and gossip and condemn these types of malicious activities? I mean, that's what that is. Those are different aspects of spreading this false rumor, spreading this false testimony against our neighbor. And of course, back then, if you spread a lie about your neighbor, that can, have life and death consequences to them. Nowadays, maybe not as much life and death, but they can they might lose a job, they might lose a position of importance. They might, I mean, of course, nowadays we got to worry about, if you're spreading a lie about someone, then there might be a mob in front of their house, protesting them or something. So
might get somebody canceled.
and I think it's foolish of us to think, well, I mean, I'm the 11,000th person that shared this link or this meme or this story. So what's the big deal? Well, I mean, it's still you're still an accomplice with this crime, and this was this is in the top 10 right after murder, stealing, and adultery. So this is pretty serious matter to even just share or perpetrate a story to others.
Yeah, I think really foundationally here, what we're talking about is this is a prohibition against giving false testimony that is going to damage fellow image bearers in a way that is not deserved. So for instance, it's really seeking justice is what it's looking for in this particular text. That if there has been a crime committed and you were witness to that crime, you are going to contribute to justice being carried out. If the person before you is the one that has carried out the crime, your true witness is to tell what took place. By you not doing that, evil is being perpetrated, evil is not being held accountable, and those whose blood cries out from the ground, they're not being justified. That's the issue here. What this is not, and I really appreciate Michael Heiser, he stresses this, I heard him stress a number of times here, is that you do not go to this text and use this text as a means to not be tactful in situations where tact would be appreciated. It'd be so easy for a husband, whenever your wife has the whole, how does this dress make me look? You shouldn't go here to the night command and say, I'm not supposed to bear false witness. Let me tell you about every single role and whatever else that dress makes you looking. We don't have to crush our wife's spirit. We don't have to give every single damaging detail. We might just be very tactful in the way we respond to that. Same thing might be true about a child after a ball game. Dad, how did I do? Well, this command isn't telling me that I have to crush that child's spirit to where he's just going to go home and cry on his bed because I told him, well, you made this mistake and that mistake and that mistake and that mistake. Really, you should probably just quit. Now, that's not what this text is telling. We need to keep it in its context. This is really about this legal system that they were under and about making sure that justice was upheld and justice was achieved. Don't use this text as a weapon for something that it was not used, that it was not intended to be used for. And that applies to every single one of these commands and any command of scripture. In fact, we can't weaponize something to go beyond what it is supposed to mean and what it was used for at that time.
I like your thoughts on just the importance of justice. I think that's a big thing that's happening right nowadays. Just
absolutely
the cry out for justice, mm-hmm. And I think we don't have the proper desire for justice that we should as well. God was a just God. He was someone that wanted justice to occur, wanted the person who commits heinous acts to meet justice. But at the same time, he tells us that vengeance is mine, I will repay. So we should cry out, we should call for justice, but I don't think as Christians we should be in the business of vengeance. And I think that's usually what happens. We see someone from, the opposite political party, and we know they're wicked. We just know. Don't know how, but we just know. We know what they believe. So because based on that evidence, it's okay to share that meme or talk poorly about them in a public setting, or be disrespectful of them in whatever way. That's not our job. We should, if we see something false, we should, call it out, but we should address the statement, and I think try to separate that from the person as much as possible. Let God deal with the person and their and in His justice. He's the one that, because I mean, no matter what we think we know, we weren't there. Whatever, conspiracy theory, whatever thing happened with such and such political leader, we weren't there. We're just going off of probably pretty unreliable sources, news sources, memes, Facebook, whatever. And that's where we get to be the judge. Well, that's not that's not all the information. So I would say leave the vengeance to God. If we see something that's unjust, call it out. But to do more than that, and connect that with the person, I think can be very close to false testimony, just because we don't have all the information that we need to be just, really. And that's the point. I don't think we can really be very just, because we just don't know. And we can make assumptions, but even that's not all the information. So just be careful what you post online.
To give me the opportunity to practice what I preach.
Yeah.
If you get your information on any subject purely from memes or social media posts, again, to practice what I preach, I'm going to use tact here. Let me encourage you to stop, because that is not helping anything. And more than likely, your perception of reality is not entirely accurate. Again, that's the tactful way. If I was going to give true witness, I might give some more detail if that was the actual way that this text is to be used. But just please think critically, think through the nuance of any situation, and allow that to be just what defines you as a person. The fact that you think through things and you just don't fly off the handle and share some particular meme. Sandra asked the question, what about if you're on a jury? I think if you're on a jury, this is a text that is very much applicable, that you don't bear false witness, that you don't allow, because whenever you're on a jury, you are to allow the facts of the case to determine the outcome. You're not to allow any sort of biases that you have, any sort of preconceived notions that you have to dictate your view. You are to be unbiased in every way, and your job as a jury member is to seek justice by the truth. You are to weigh the facts that are presented and nothing else, the evidence that is presented in this case, and to go on that. I think that's, as somebody who would have to serve on a jury, or might be put in that position, I think this applies in that particular case. I don't know if it's necessarily because as a jury, you're not a witness to the particular case, to the thing that happened, but you are being a witness of sorts through the evidence that is presented. And you ought to, again, desire justice, whether justice goes this way or that way. That ought to be what you're seeking. What do you think, Alan, about Sandra's question about what if you were on a jury in this case?
Oh yeah, I mean the importance of just valuing justice is and God's justice as well. It's and we have a saying in our country: you're you're not guilty until proven innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty. So it is.
At least that used to be.
At least it's supposed to be on the shoulders of the accuser to make the case open and shut at that point. And if it's not, then if there's doubt, then err on the side of caution and do not convict but acquit. So um, haven't been able to be on a jury, and I'm definitely not a judge, but I mean, that's part of their job is to weigh the evidence and rightfully judge. That's what we would expect of our judges and our juries, and to rightfully judge based on the evidence given to them. That's their purpose in the law.
Yeah, being a witness to the evidence. Mm-hmm. And following the natural conclusion of the evidence. Again, putting bias aside, anything else, and just going based on the evidence. That would be the honest way to be a witness in that situation, I do believe. Now that brings us finally to the last of the 10 commandments, the last of the words here and the Decalogue, which tells us to do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his donkey or his ox, anything that belongs to your neighbor. Alan, I think this might be a great summary command here, and it might be why it is left here at the end to kind of give a summation for everything that's being spoken of up to this point. Again, to put a nice bow on the 10 commandments.
This one's interesting because it kind of overlaps with several of the previous ones. I think murder, commit adultery, steal. Yeah, there's some overlap here, and this one is not quite as easily. There's no action that we can point to as, oh, he coveted. Mm-hmm. I mean, coveted is almost exclusively within yourself, within your thought and your mind and your heart.
It's the heart.
Yeah. Right. So it's interesting. Like, how do you? I mean, if there's a murder, you see the evidence of that action happening. How do you uphold this law? And the point is, this wasn't a law given to a people that they were supposed to be watching other people to see if they murdered or committed adultery or honored their father or mother. God is telling them, he's telling each one of them. I mean, this law was supposed to be on their hearts. They are, in a sense, to self-police themselves. And this is a perfect example of how they're supposed to do that. They're self-policing their hearts. They would be the only ones to know if they've coveted their neighbor's wife or whatever, at least until there's some sort of action based on that coveting. I think it's interesting, the word covet, I was reading that it's the same Hebrew word as in Genesis 3, when Eve saw and desired the fruit. So obviously that desire, that wanting, that coveting that Eve had led to sin. So this is, again, I think this ties in really well with how Jesus commentates these laws. These laws kind of are talking about the end of the sin, and that it results in an action of murder or commit adultery. Whereas covet, and how Jesus interpreted those other laws, he is telling them to watch out for the beginning, where sin is creeping in right there. It's at the door waiting. Its desire is for you. That's what God told Cain, but you should not let it in. Well, Cain let it in, and it resulted in murder. So that's the idea with this one. We do not covet others, and really, I mean, what does it mean to covet? What are you doing? You're looking outside of what you have, your wife, your things, your life, and you are not happy with what you have because someone else has something else. So that's the complete opposite of how God's people should be. We should be looking at our lives no matter what. I mean, obviously there's Christians with, rich, wealthy children, happiness, health, all those good things. There's Christians with the complete opposite of that. There's no stipulation that those rich, healthy, happy Christians that's different from those that are not that way. We should not be coveting what we don't have. We should be happy with the things that we have. And that's going to be tougher for some than others, because, like I said, some people have more than others. Some people are blessed with more than others, but there's no differentiation here between rich and poor, happy and sad. It just says don't covet what other people have. We should be happy with what the Lord has blessed us with, and really, those physical things shouldn't really matter. All of those things will be destroyed. So what can we all have in common? Well, hope in Christ, hope in a home in heaven where we will have equity in that sense. In everything, we will all be there with God in the same way. We won't have more or less than the next person. So that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're looking forward to. But there's an acknowledgement here that that's not the status. That's not the way it is here. But that we should still have that same kind of heaven mindset even here on earth.
I think you said it really well right at the very beginning. This gets to the heart. This is a heart issue where there's this obsessive desire for what is not yours. And again, we kind of picked on David, but David really checks a lot of these boxes within
So many.
this particular study we've had. He ended up murdering. He committed adultery. He stole. And it all began with coveting. We might even say, he gave false witness in a sense, and the fact that he deceived. He was deceiving Uriah out of that which was his. He had already taken his wife, and he tried to make it seem like that nothing had happened. Just so much took place. But again, if we want to talk about the emphasis and the importance of this particular command, it all began with coveting in David's mind. He saw Bathsheba. He greatly desired her. He obsessed over her to the point that he asked about her, and then having her over to the palace. And we know how the story unfortunately goes from there. An important command, and really, I think a good summation and a good place to make sure that we are giving proper emphasis to within our hearts, so that we don't find ourselves guilty of breaking other commandments of God. So put yourself in the scene then of in the shoes of a Hebrew at this time, a Jew at this time, when the Israelites, that God speaks all of these words, and the people, verse 18, witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain surrounded by smoke. When the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. You speak to us and we will listen, they said to Moses, but don't let God speak to us or we will die. And Moses responded to the people, don't be afraid, for God has come to test you so that you will fear him and will not sin. And the people remained standing at a distance as Moses approached the total darkness where God was. This whole event, which to us, we might think, man, how cool would it have been to be in the presence of this mountain, in the vicinity of this mountain as this is taking place. We might think that would be cool, but we look here at the result, the response of all these people. It was not a cool thing. They were terrified by the power of God being seen in this theophany, this incredible encounter with God here within the text, Alan. And at this point, they tell Moses, hey, let him talk to you. And then why don't you just go ahead and relay the message? Why don't you be a prophet? You great prophet of God, do your job. That way we don't have to interact with God, because it's just the terrifying event that this was.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the times I don't blame the people for their reaction. I mean, they were terrified. This is how you're supposed to react when God comes, and that's how usually there is a reaction. If they see an angel or something in the Old Testament, they would fall down. Okay, I'm about to die because I saw God. But verse 20, don't be afraid, for God has come to test you so that you will fear him and will not sin. Why is he doing this? I mean, why? I mean, I think this ties into why they have the law to begin with. I forget where it's mentioned, Galatians or wherever, that the law was given to us so that we would we would know about sin. Mm-hmm. By hearing this law, these 10 commandments, and then of course all of the numerous laws after it in picture, perfectly highlighted how flawed this people was and how flawed everyone was, because this is the standard that God had put before them of who should be his people. Well, I mean, which of those people would say they've never broken any of these laws? I mean, none of them could have said that. none of them will say that. Many of them will break more than one, or even some of the most heinous laws. And we're in the same boat, you know. Who of us can say that we are perfect and without sin? Well, nobody. So this law is just as it was for the children of Israel. Same for us today. It's supposed to highlight, you know, the standard that God has and how far we are from that standard. And that gap, that distance is supposed to be so great that we we desire something to, we know that we could never, you know, bridge that gap ourselves. So then we start looking toward something else to bridge that gap between our own imperfections and the standard that God has set. And there's only one thing that can do that, and that's the blood of Christ. And that's, you know, the mercy of God, you know, just wiping away those sins. There's nothing, no number of actions we could do, number of laws we could adhere to, or whatever, that we could bridge that gap. So we needed Christ to help us with that. And yeah, so that's what I've got for verse 20. You know, they learned about their sin. Unfortunately, we'll see that doesn't really change many of their hearts here later on.
Unfortunately, Romans 7 and verse 7, Alan, what should we say then? Is the law sin? Absolutely not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. For example, I would not have known what it is to covet. The law had said, do not covet. That title in Galatians chapter 3, I think, it really gives us a proper understanding of the usefulness of the law and why it is that God introduced it. It was one to set the boundary markers for the people so they would know what true holiness and righteousness was. And then the opposite effect of that, of course, is to know what sin is. But again, let me also suggest to you that this is an opportunity for the people to show their loyalty, that this is the standard that God has handed down, and God now is going to expect the loyalty from them. And this loyalty is a response to the fact that he's chosen them as his people. And through the actions then that took place in Egypt and following Egypt at the Red Sea, they should believe that God, they should believe what we see in chapter 20 and verse number 2, that I am the Lord your God. They should believe that. And based upon that belief, they are loyal to him, and that loyalty in a sense as well proves that belief, and they're to live in harmony with God in this way. As you said, unfortunately, excuse me, what we're going to see not too far down the road, let's see here, once we get back into the real narrative, once we get past a lot of the details given about the law here, once we get back into the narrative in, I think it's chapter 32, right? Yeah, chapter 32, after we get through a lot of the details concerning the law, well, we're going to see they forget these things pretty quickly, but we're not quite there yet. We'll get to chapter 32 at some point in the future, and we hope that you'll join us whenever we do that. Thank you, Alan, so much for your preparation and for your great teaching and insights into this text. I think it'd be really easy for us to not give proper attention and not really dive into the meaning behind this text, and just to take it at face value through our 21st century Western eyes and kind of miss a lot of the nuance that's here. But thank you for leading us in this study, and thank you for joining us. Hope that's been beneficial to you, and we hope that you will continue to be with us as we walk through history here on Tuesdays and Fridays as we walk through the book of Genesis. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to join us on Sunday, we're going to be out in the parking lot worshiping here at the church house, 384 Pleasant Plains Road at 9 a.m. on Sunday. Hope that you can join us for that worship assembly as we continue to try to do what the church does. The church worships. We look forward to worshiping together as a church on Sunday. But if you are unable to be with us, maybe because of sickness, because you're in a high risk for the sickness, we invite you to join us. We'll be streaming on Facebook and YouTube as well. That's the goal, at least, is to be streaming on Facebook and YouTube that assembly on Sunday. Alan, you have anything else you want to share with us before we log off for today?
Yeah, looking forward to Sunday. I on my birthday, we had our first drive-in service, and as I call it, and that was the first one we've been to in several months. And then of course last week we had to cancel, but I'm excited for round 2 here this time.
Yeah, it was strange. It was a strange environment for myself, preaching with a microphone in my hand and then having the wind blowing and blowing my pages, my Bible, my notes around. It was strange. It went through very quickly, but hopefully having done it once, it'll go a little smoother this time, at least from my perspective. And hopefully everybody will just be blessed by being able to worship together, to see one another, and to lift up praises to God. But yeah, if you'd like to join us then in person, please feel free to do so. But if not, we will still be here online as well.
I heard we had some neighbors like across the street listening.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah.
From their back. So even when we're back inside, we should probably just set up a big.
Hey man,
some big
like
microphones and.
Hey, I'm a fan. I'm a fan for sure. Well, thank you all so much. God bless you. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And we hope you'll join us again next Tuesday as we continue to walk through history. God bless. Everybody take care.